Hey, it's great again to see you guys. We're in a series right now called Changing Church. I've mentioned this for several weeks that I wrote a book on changing church, but this series is not about the book. This is an amazing story, and the reason why it's so amazing is because it's all about you. And we came together and we made a major change, and we've made an impact in our city. Also, we're making an impact around the world. It's all because one day we decided to just come together with one vision. And one of the biggest visions that we had was that we're going to be a church of all ages reaching a young generation. That came out of us, that we were a 75-year-old church at that time, very traditional, had not grown in many, many years, just at a standstill. And when we started down that path, it was like the hand of God rested upon us, and we exploded in growth, started really reaching a young generation, and it has been amazing. So this book is 13 chapters long, and I would like to encourage you that if you have not picked the book up and you are a member of this church or you regularly come, pick that book up and read it, because it will connect you with this church in no other way. But what I want to talk about today and what this series is all about is that we're writing chapter 14 right now, all of us together, and that we're launching a brand new adult ministry that involves all of us and how that we can really make an impact in this world. What I want to talk to you about for the next few moments is the light. This whole service is revolved around light, the power of light that is in you. You know, whenever you think about darkness, darkness generally is associated with evil. Under the cover of darkness is where violent crimes take place. It's under the darkness is where crimes go out and crimes take place as well. It's under the cover of darkness. One of the largest power outages that the United States has ever experienced was in August of 2003 in the northeastern part of the United States. When this happened, there were major cities that were completely blacked out, no electricity whatsoever. The first night that these major cities were without light, it was eerie, it was strange, it was spooky for most people. Then they began to receive word that it would probably 2 or 3 nights before they would be able to get the electricity back on in some places. And when people heard the news of that, then the second night of that blackout, that looting went wild. People in neighborhoods started going to nearby stores and breaking down the doors and breaking out the glass, going in and taking whatever they wanted, electronics, televisions, headphones, laptops, just taking whatever they wanted. What was so strange about this time was that wasn't done by criminals. It was done by people living in neighborhoods like we live in. It was done by normal, ordinary people, but in the darkness of night, where there was no light, the electricity was out, that people begin to operate in a darkness. And darkness produces an evilness. Make no mistake that there is an evilness, that there is a dark side in all of us. There is a dark side in me, and there's a dark side in you. And people many times prefer darkness over the light. You know, it reminds me of an old man that was very poor, didn't have much in life. And one night he woke up, it was in the middle of the night, and he was starving to death, and all he had was just a small can of dates. And so he lit a candle, and it was the only light that he had, and there by the candlelight, he reached into the can and took out a date, and it had a worm in it, so he threw it away. He reached back into the can and pulled out another date, and it also had a worm, and he threw it away. He realized that he was going to end up throwing every one of those dates away. And so he simply blew out the candle and ate the dates. Because we do things in the dark that we would not do in the light. You see, Jesus confirms this in John chapter 3 and verse 19. When he's talking about darkness and he's talking about light, listen to what he says. He says, "Men love the darkness rather than the light, for their works were evil." And now Isaiah in the Old Testament is prophesying about this amazing light one day that will come into the world, which we know today is Jesus Christ. And he tells of it, he foretells that, and in Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 20, he says, "Your sun shall no more go down, neither shall your moon withdraw itself, for Yahweh, In other words, God will be your everlasting light, and the days of your mourning shall be ended. And here Isaiah is saying there is a coming light, and when that light comes, it will push away the darkness, and light will begin to shine in the hearts and the minds of people, and there will be a transformation. And now Jesus Christ comes on the scene, and He fulfills that prophecy in John chapter 8 and verse 12. When Jesus stands before a crowd of people, and He says, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have light of life. And He's saying that I am the light of the world. But Jesus didn't stop there. He went on and He addresses us this morning. As new believers, as New Testament believers, He addresses all of us. And in Matthew chapter 5, and starting with verse 14, He now says, because I dwell in you, because you've invited me in. Now He turns the table and He says, and now you are the light of the world. And this is the phrase that Brandon mentioned a few moments ago when Jesus went on and said, a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. When there's a city on a hill and at night when it's lit up, it can be seen for miles around. You cannot hide a city that is lit up. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives out light to everyone in the house. And in the very same way, and He points a finger at all of us today, in the very same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Once again, I want to tell you there is a great light that is inside of us, that shines in us, and that light cannot stay inside, but it must shine forth that others would be attracted to the same light that you've experienced. It was in the mid-1900s in Europe where there was a widespread sickness that took place. And they didn't know how to stop it. It was spreading rapidly, and it was killing people. It was killing the elderly and the young, and they were very worried. In fact, panic began to settle in. And so the authorities all got together and they said, we have got to figure out some way to stop this. And they said, for 7 days, let's just stop all public gatherings and allow this to run its course, and maybe the sickness will play out and it won't spread to others. And so they shut down every public setting, such as church gatherings, schools, work, for 7 days, trying to isolate people. One pastor there in the city who pastored a huge cathedral downtown, knowing that no one would gather that week in the church, became creative. And he went to the stained glass windows that faced out to the front of the street, and he put spotlights on the inside of the building, shining up on the lights or on the glass, and outside in the darkness, it was like it glowed and it drew everyone's attention that walked by. And those stained glass windows became like silent sermons of glass and light, and people were captivated by it. As they walked by, they would see the timeless portraits of Christ, and there would be a picture of Jesus holding a lamb, that He's the good shepherd. Another one would be with Jesus praying in the garden. Another, Christ is on the cross, and then another stained glass window would be Jesus coming out of the tomb. And people walking by were captivated by these scenes. And they would stop, and they would reflect, and they would remember. And it was like the very words of Isaiah when he said, and your sun shall no more go down, neither shall your moon withdraw itself, because God is the everlasting light. Robert Louis Stevenson is the one who wrote the book Treasure Island. When Robert was a young boy, he was riddled with sickness. And he spent much of his childhood in the hospital. It was one evening, a nurse was walking down the hallway and looked into his room and saw that he was not in bed, but he was standing at the window looking out. And it was a cold, wintry, snowy day, and he was looking out the window, and she snapped at him and said, "Get away from that window. You're going to catch your cold of your death of cold." And yet he didn't move from the window. He just stayed pressed up against the window, mesmerized by what was down below. And he saw a candle lighter lighting the lamps as he went down the street. And the nurse standing at the doorway heard this little boy say, that, look, there's a man who's poking holes into the darkness. When Isaiah wrote his words, there weren't cobblestone streets, there weren't frosty windows, but there was a type of lamplighter that was in their day. And Isaiah writes about this in Isaiah 52 and verse 7 when he says, how beautiful are the mountains, are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices together, and they shout for joy. When the Lord returns to Zion, they will see it with their own eyes. Now, Isaiah is referring back to a story that happened hundreds of years before. What he writes about is during the time of David, found in 2 Samuel chapter 18, when David was at the palace in Jerusalem, and he was pacing back and forth like a wild animal, waiting to hear news back from his army that he had sent out, and were they victorious or had his army been defeated? And he was a nervous wreck waiting. One of David's men was in the tower on the city wall, and he yells down at David, and he says, I see a runner coming in our direction. I think that he's a messenger bringing the news. And David calls up to him and says, if the runner is alone, it means that he's bringing good news. And the man in the tower watches, and he watches this man run through the foothills, and as he comes closer and closer to the city, and now he runs through the city gates and up to where David is. And now he comes with news, and he speaks to David, and he says, all is well. Praise the Lord, your God has given you victory over your enemies. And he was a messenger of good news. Now, this is what Isaiah was writing about hundreds of years later when Isaiah writes these words and he turns it into a song. And now Isaiah is singing this song, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. You know, anytime we share good news, it's poking holes into the darkness. You see, every one of us in this room, we have been called to be a herald. That we have the ability to open our mouth and to proclaim good news or bad news. We have the ability, by what we say and by what we do, to poke holes in the darkness of this world. Or we have the ability to blend into the darkness. And bearers of good news have become a rare breed. There are few who proclaim good news. There are few who will inspire others to greatness. There are few who will bring a positive message and building others up, because it seems that we're surrounded constantly with nothing but bad news. It reminds me of a barber. That one day a man walks in for a haircut, and he walks in and he's on top of the world, the best day of his life, and he's whistling and he's happy, and he sits down in the barber's chair, and the barber's kind of a grumpy old man, and he says, what are you so happy about? He said, well, I'm happy because my wife and I next week are going on vacation, and we're going to Rome, and I cannot wait. We're going to go and we're going to see all the sights and all the history, and we hope to see the Pope while we're there. Well, the barber said, well, that's silly. He said, I've heard that Rome is a horrible place to visit, that there's nothing good in Rome. It's just a bunch of old buildings. I've heard the hotels are bad, the food is horrible, that the people are rude, and nobody sees the Pope. In fact, when the President of the United States goes to Rome, he doesn't even get to see the Pope. He said, I'm telling you, you ought to go home. Tell your wife that you need to change your plans, do something different. You're going to spend a fortune on a vacation you're going to hate. Well, the man finished with his hair, and he walked out the door. Several weeks later, the same man came back for another haircut. He walks in the door and he's whistling, and he's as happy as ever. The best day of his life. And he sits down in the barber's chair, and the barber says, what are you so happy about? He said, we just got back from Rome, and it was the greatest vacation we've ever had. We saw all the old buildings and all the history. The hotel was fabulous. The food was phenomenal. The people were kind, and we even got to see the Pope. The barber stopped cutting his hair, and he walked around. He said, you're telling me you saw the Pope? He said, absolutely. He said, I was as close to the Pope as I am to you. He said it was the craziest thing. I was standing there on the street with thousands of people lining the street as the Pope was walking by. And it's like he zeroed in on me. It was like he just pulled me out of the crowd. He walked straight over to where I was. And he leaned over and he cupped his hand and he whispered in my ear so no one else could hear. And he said, that's the worst haircut I have ever seen. What I'm telling you today is don't you let anybody hinder your enjoyment of life. Don't let anyone stop what God has started in your life, because there are people everywhere that just want to tell you that you can't enjoy life. It's not right for you. It's not good for you. I want to tell you there's greatness everywhere. All we have to do is open our eyes. It's easy to get negative when we're around negative people. It's easy to just go in a bad direction when all you hear is just bad news. And you got to learn to rise up above the normal. Rise up above the crowd. Get yourself above what everybody else is doing and realize that I have been called to be a messenger of good news. That I've been called to be a messenger of what Jesus Christ has done in my life, and that I must proclaim those words. When does good news become beautiful? It becomes beautiful when you open your mouth and you simply share good news. John Newton was a vile, corrupt, evil man. John Newton was a man that grew up just following his father's footsteps because his father and now John had been slave traders, and they treated human beings like animals. They captured them and they sold them, and human life was nothing but a commodity for them, and they were cruel men. That is, until one day John had an encounter with Jesus Christ that so radically changed him. And now he becomes a minister of the gospel. Instead of enslaving men, he begins to preach a message of freedom and deliverance and the grace of Jesus Christ. One day, John was reflecting upon what God had done in his life. And he sat down at a table and he just started jotting down some words, and he started turning it into a song. And he wrote that day one of the most popular songs of all time, Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. When you hear the song, Amazing Grace, it's kind of that good news kind of song. And because of that song, thousands upon thousands of people have identified with his story, have identified with the words that he wrote, how wretched, how sinful, and yet by the amazing grace of God, he can change everything and wipe everything away. And thousands have come to know Christ because of what he wrote that day. What if John Newton had never written the song? What if John Newton had been so radically transformed and changed, and yet he never shared it with anyone? Because his story is a story of good news. And his story for all that hear has become beautiful. You know, I have a story. You have a story. It's a story of power. It's a story of deliverance. It's a story of what Christ has done in you. And others must hear the story. We can't any longer be silent because we live in a dark world. If you're following the news, you find how that it seems that we're moving in a direction of even more darkness. It's not a time for us to let down, but it's a time for the church to intensify and realize that we are the light of the world. And if you've invited Christ into your life, then you become a bright light that makes a difference. Hazel was a lady that was extremely poor. She had had a hard life, But she loved God with all of her heart, and she loved her church. And more than anything else, she loved singing. She joined the church choir, and she outsang everyone else, that is, in volume. I mean, she would open her mouth and sing twice as loud as everyone else, but the only problem was she couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. Finally, the choir director had to approach her and say, why don't you find another place to be involved? Well, it didn't hurt her feelings. She just found another place, but standing in the congregation, she continued to worship and she continued to sing so loud. Well, living in a very, very poor part of town, it was a violent area. At night, when she would lay down in this one little bedroom house, she'd hear all the noises of people screaming and fighting and gunshot sounds and police sirens going off all night long. One night she was coming home from church. She was getting close to her apartment, the little path that led up to the apartment, and there was a big tree there near her apartment complex, and she noticed as she was walking closer to her apartment door that there was a silhouette, a shadow standing underneath the tree. It caused her to stop in her tracks, knowing that there was much violence and many murders in that area, that she could be mugged, she could be killed, and she was frightened by the figure she saw underneath the tree. It was cold that night. She had no other place to go, and she had to go down the path to get to her room, and she did what she only knew she could do, and she started singing. And she sang as loud as she could sing, and she sang a song that she learned when she was just a child. And she started singing the song, "When you walk through a storm, keep your head up high. Don't be afraid of the dark. Walk on with hope in your heart. You'll never walk alone." As she sang that song with all of her might, she walked right by the tree, right by the man underneath the tree, up to her door. She went inside, shut the door, locked the door, and stood there trembling for the longest time. The next morning, when she opened up her door, she found a note laying outside. She picked it up, and it was from the man underneath the tree. He said, "Dear lady, I don't know who you are, but I want to thank you for the song that you sang last night. Because I was standing there at the end and ready to commit suicide and end my own life. When I heard you singing that song as you walked by last night, it seemed that you had not a care in the world. And as you sang the song, you never walk alone." He said, "It caused me to remember when I was just a little boy in Sunday school, listening to those Bible stories and being told that God never leaves us alone." He said, "Last night, I wanted to change my life after hearing your song. I want what you have, and I'm committing myself back to God. Thank you for the song that you sang." You know, God has this mysterious way of using us in ways that we would never think. So many times in my life, in your life, that we have done things, we have said things, or just simply by the life that we live, have impacted the lives of people that we'll never, ever know about. It's mysterious in how that God can use our light, how God can use our words, our personality, our talents, our joy that will dispel the darkness in the lives of other people. And what I am here to tell you today is that we have the ability to make a major impact into our city, into our nation, into our world. Because the light that is inside of us is a supernatural light that goes beyond our abilities. You see, what we're doing today is we're writing chapter 14. It's a whole new chapter and a whole new direction of how that we're launching adult ministries in so many different ways. And today, I want to tell you about how that in outreach and just reaching into a dark world and a dark city, that we can make an amazing difference. And on our staff, we have Shelley Rep. And Shelley is out of town today. She's not with us because she's leading a group that is down in Mexico. They left yesterday. But on their ride down in the van, she just sent us a quick video, and I want you to take a look at this.
Hi, my name is Shelly Rep, and I'm the outreach pastor here at Pointe Church. And this weekend is all about outreach. And wouldn't you know that the weekend they're talking about outreach, I'm not there. I'm actually like on a missions trip to do outreach. So I did want to just say how excited I am, though, to hear Pastor Dustin and Pastor Galen talk about all the different initiatives that we're involved in with Pointe Church. We're going to be working down with the Tarahumara people in Chihuahua City, Mexico. And some of the things that they struggle with are the very same things that the people of Albuquerque struggle with. Things like poverty, homelessness, food insecurity. These are all common things throughout mankind and with humanity in general. It's up to us, the people of God, to go out, do our part, and bring hope to the hopeless. You can be a part of that. Hope to see you soon, Pointe. Bye-bye. Bye.
Well, that is amazing. We send a group down to Mexico, into Chihuahua, about 4 or 5 times a year. If you have not done that yet, make sure you sign up and go. It is life-changing, absolutely unbelievable what has happened there. Dustin, there's a lot of great things that are taking place in our church with our people, a lot of fun and exciting things. Just a side note real quick, something happened that was great with one of our own members here, Dylan. Why don't you tell us about Dylan real quick?
Yeah, Dylan Farrell is one of the members at Copper Pointe, was highly involved in Wake, our college young adult ministry, for the last few years, was a captain on the UNM football team, and we found out yesterday that he officially made the roster of the San Francisco 49ers, which is really cool.
Yeah, that is really, really cool. And Dylan has just been one of the great leaders of our church and was a spiritual leader on the Lobos team. And so it's really exciting to see that take place. But so many great things do take place. And Dustin, I wanted you to come today and that you were able to spend a lot of time with Shelly talking about outreach and really just making an impact in our world. And as I just mentioned a few moments ago, if there's ever a time that we as a church need to rise up, it's now, because we're living in a dark, dark world. So share with us some of the things that are taking place.
Yeah, for the last 6 months, I've gotten to work really close with Pastor Shelly Rep, and just to see a lot of the really cool things that we've already been doing as a church in our outreach ministry, but then also hearing her heart. We met on Thursday, prepping for this before she went out of town, and just talking about, her heart and the vision of this church and where she's taking that, her heart for the city and the state and the country. And it's just really cool to know we have somebody in this position as an outreach pastor in our church who, lives and breathes this. And it's grown into something really cool that we want to share. Just a few. We're just scratching the surface, really, in these couple minutes that we have. But our outreach program at our church is really split into 2 different tracks. One of those is called CP Serve, and we hear a lot about that. And if you're new to the church, you'll continue to hear more about that. But also another track called Spoken For, which is our anti-human trafficking initiative that we started at the church a couple years ago. CP Serve, underneath that umbrella, really what you'll find is a lot of things like feeding the homeless. Once a month, we go downtown and we'll feed several hundred of the homeless. It's a really cool thing that if you and your family have not been a part of, make sure that you sign up or get involved with Feed ABQ. It's a really cool thing that we do. Also, with CP Serve, we do things like this coming Thanksgiving. We've done it the last few Thanksgivings. We'll feed and raise money and get meals enough to give out over 1,000 Thanksgiving meals to our community. We've done things in the past like bicycle giveaways for Christmas, and we've done, partnered with our children's ministry for Easter egg hunts, and the list goes on and on and on, things that we've done in our community with CP Serve. Towards the end of this year and into 2015, one of the things that Shelly is going to be starting is to really give you some great, easy handles to grab onto CP Serve. So we don't just have to hear about it and applaud the people that are already doing it. We want to provide you very easy ways to get involved with you and your family. One of those ways is about once a month, we're going to be having, and I think we're just going to call them handles, but a CP Serve handle where you and your family can do things in our community, like if there's vandalism at a Little League, that's a real situation that we've had this last year, or there's a certain area in the city that just needs to be cleaned up. In the city, Shelly has connections in the city, and she gets phone calls all the time about if there's people in our church that are interested in doing something, partnering with our city to repair certain areas, to repaint buildings, to help with vandalism and graffiti. So you may not see the spiritual side of that at face value, But there's so many instances in the New Testament where Jesus and the apostles talk about just going out and being a light in the city.
Yeah.
And as conversations start, and we're from Pointe Church, and this is why we're doing that, that's how Jesus really gets taken out into a city in a really cool, unique way. So that'll be starting in 2015. Another thing that we're doing underneath the CP Serve umbrella is starting something called City Tours, which is really cool. Most of these takes place on Saturday mornings, and there's a table in the atrium to your left where you can sign up for these for you and your family. But what we're doing, really, the way Shelley describes this, is we go on about a 2-hour tour in Albuquerque. And when my dad and I first went on this, I was thinking, what in the world is Shelley going to show us? We've been here for my whole life, and you've been here for longer than that. What is she going to show us that we don't already know in Albuquerque? But the way she describes it is this. CP Serve has really gotten the chance to pull back the curtain in Albuquerque, go a little bit deeper than what you see at face value. You may drive by and just see a building, but you may not know what's actually happening inside that building. And on this city tour, what she does is she'll talk to you and your family, or the tour guide will, about what CP Serve is already doing in the city. You see this building and this group of people, we're doing this and that, and driving all around downtown, going the big loop around the area, around our church, and it's so cool hearing about the future things that we're going to be doing. So City Tours is really it's like an appetizer to get you hungry for what we're about to do as a church. We have just scratched the surface on what CP Serve is going to be doing. Also, I said the other track is an initiative called Spoken For, the anti-human trafficking campaign. When we first started this, we were just in a staff meeting a couple years ago, and Shelley, I believe, Shelley and my mom just started talking about their heart for, these young girls and even young men that are being trafficked all around the world. And you don't even think about it actually happening in Albuquerque. But around the state fair and the balloon fiesta, there are thousands and thousands of young women and young men being sexually trafficked in our city, right in front of our eyes, and we don't even see what's going on. Very few churches have acknowledged it. Even different areas in the government really haven't gone there. And our church has gotten so aggressive in fighting this. I was talking to Shelley on Thursday, and I said, so where are we at with this? Are we one of the front runners with this? I mean, what are we actually accomplishing? And she said, as of right now in the state, we're the #1 organization fighting human trafficking in the state of New Mexico, and it's birthed out of Pointe Church. Cool. Some really cool things. This next year, we're going to be starting, for the first time, true safe houses for these young girls as they come out of this lifestyle, getting them into safe houses. We're working with the city right now and the Attorney General about getting them education, health care, taking care of them immediately, because it's not just getting them to stop being trafficked, but what do they do with their life? How do we show them Jesus? How do we get them not just meeting their physical needs, but how do we start meeting their spiritual needs? And we know, seeing in the Bible, you meet their spiritual needs by meeting their physical ones. And that's what we're going to be doing in 2015. We have a website that we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks called spokenfornm.com. We do several runs a year and fundraisers a year. We did our first conference this last year for human trafficking. Several hundred people came from around the region to hear what's going on. Guys, this is not something that's small. This is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But when we start tackling something in the world that Satan has had a stronghold on since the beginning, this is something that he has won. I mean, his mind, the battle is won. When churches start rising up against this, he's not going to just lay over and say, okay, take all the girls back. This is going to be a fight all the way through. And even as I'm saying these words, and Shelley told me to articulate this, if you feel in your heart that this is something God has called you to, and when you hear about the mess that's happening in our world and even in our city, and you're thinking, enough is enough, I don't want to talk about it, raising awareness is fine, but we can't stop there, this is the ministry that you need to get involved in, because we're leading the way, and we literally believe that we can put this to an end in Albuquerque, and we think it's ridiculously exciting.
Absolutely. And so, that's just kind of like he said, just touching the surface of all of this. But Dustin, why don't you tell us, what's out in the atrium today and how they can get involved?
Awesome. Real quick, like I said, there's a table to your left as you exit these doors. And there's a couple things you need to know. At this table, whether it's CP Serve or Spoken For, you can actually sign up for newsletter updates. There's some information there where you can sign up for that. And any new things that are coming up, the easy ways for you to get involved, we really would like for you to sign up out there, and we'll just be updating you on those upcoming events. Also, we've put together something called a rescue bag. And a rescue bag is kind of something unique. We've talked a lot about people that stand on the side of the road and maybe say, I'm hungry or in need of a job or just asking for money at all. We've all had that happen, and in our car, it's a very confusing moment because you might be in the same way, but I rarely carry cash at all. And so if I'm asked for money, I have to look at these people and be like, I don't have anything. But then even if you do have cash, if you're being very real, you're wondering, is this the smartest thing to do? Should I be giving them cash? And we've talked a lot about that. What can we do for these people? Because we don't just want to drive by. So we put together a rescue bag, and here is toothpaste, bottled water, deodorant, non-perishable foods. There's Kleenexes, toilet paper, you name it, it's in this bag. And we've been selling these last night and the first service this morning for $2 in the atrium. We prepared 300 and naively thought that might be enough. We have sold out of all 300 and have already taken 200 pre-orders. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
And so this is actually the very last bag, and I'm keeping
That
it.
is it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so this is what we wanted to let you know, though, is I talked to the team. You can go out to the table and you can pre-order bags. We're going to have teams of people all through the week be preparing these. You can also prepare your own. There's a list out there we can give you of the items in here. There's 12 items in the bag, but you can sign up for a pre-order. There's $2 a piece is what we're selling these for. So that you can't put them together for less than $2. And so pre-order as many as you would like. You can pick them up next week. And also at the table, if you and your family want to jump on board and kind of impromptu, because we didn't know we were going to need this, join the team and put these together this week. We're also going to need help doing that because we think when this is all said and done in this one weekend, we'll be selling close to 1,000 bags,
Right.
which is really, really cool.
Right, right.